We're going to have a quick chat to Boris Johnson's dad, Stanley, who is a former Conservative Member of Parliament. Stanley, good evening.
Hey, good evening.
Now, I know it's taken a while to get you there, Stanley, but excellent. Good.
It's technology, I tell you. I mean, you can panic. As a matter of fact, I was watching the football game anyway. What happened, by the way?
Well, I don't know. It's not finished yet. It's 1-1.
1-1. 1-1 still.
Yeah.
In extra time.
Yeah,
then.
extra time. Man.
In fact, I've just noticed it in the studio as well as the control room. Please take that off.
We'll keep you informed.
Listen, Stanley, 14 years in power and then suddenly the worst results for years and years. Why?
I think ever.
Well, I've got to say, it was a rotten campaign. I mean, hard to believe it went from one unforced error to another. I was actually just flabbergasted when the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, came back home from Normandy without having waited to join the Americans and join everybody else on Omaha Beach, which is where the Americans had taken such a hammering on
those people who work in his office must be pretty stupid too, because they would have been advising him, wouldn't they?
Unbelievable. And I've got to say, I thought it was quite remarkable that David Cameron, who is an extremely sensible and intelligent man, allowed himself to be maneuvered into that position as it were substituting for the Prime Minister on that occasion. I mean, I think everything went downhill from that moment very, very fast.
From when they got rid of your son, it was obvious that, you know, he would have beaten Starmer, even if they'd done a terrible job just on the way he performs during an election. And they shot themselves in the foot. And Rishi Sunak, he got with a parking ticket for going to a party anyway. So it was all ridiculous.
Why did Boris not turn up and do a bit more campaigning?
No, I'm not in charge of this diary, but I tell you something. I have read week after week some very, very powerful editorial stuff, op-ed stuff in the Mail every Saturday, including, I think he would say, he coined the phrase Starmageddon, and he has been firing big salvos, battleship-type salvos every week.
Do you think that Boris, your son, and Nigel Farage together would head a new party that would have an enormous amount of support?
Well, interesting idea. My line has been throughout that I will support any party which does the kind of thing I want to see happen. And I wouldn't be that keen on a party headed by Boris and Farage if it ended up by putting into effect too many of the kind of Farage's nonsense which I see out there. As far as I'm concerned, what really matters is for all the Brexiteers in this world, and that, of course, includes my son, to say, look, that happened, but now the really important thing is to rebuild these bridges with Europe.
You want to reverse it, don't you? You want to reverse Brexit, basically.
I don't want to reverse Brexit. I want to rebuild some bridges with Europe. For example, in my field, which is the environmental field, it is absolutely obvious that we need to go back into the European Environment Agency, which is open to non-EU countries. There are 6 or 7 of them already there. We cannot fight these big battles on climate change, even defence and all sorts of things, without realising we're part of the wider European framework.
Well, listen, we're prepared to do that. I'm a Brexiteer. I believe that we shouldn't be told what to do by a bunch of dullards.
We're not
in
told
Brussels.
What to do
We
by
are.
A bunch of,
we are.
We are. No, Jimmy. We are part of the scene. I was there 40 years in Europe, and believe you me, the UK played a major role in all the collective decisions which were taken.
The poor have got very poor, and the rich have got very rich in the time we were in the EU. I mean, look at what workers get. They're still on 30 grand, but bosses aren't on 100 grand. They're on 500,000 now, so that's what's changed.
If that was true, Stanley, then why didn't the politicians let us know? Because the politicians looked weak in the whole of what I now call the European dictatorship, because that's, to my view, what it is.
They're in on it.
And we should be tougher about the way we left. We should be tougher. And at the moment, if you look in France, they are going to have a very right-wing government very soon.
Holland. Yeah.
All the more reason for the UK to be at the table in one way or another. And of course, it's going to be another. But we actually have to make our voice heard. Enormously important now in Europe. There's so many things. Don't think we can deal with immigration without being part of the wider European perspective. Don't think we can do environment, certainly not climate change. We have to be part of the wider scene. And there's one good thing I noticed about the way the Labour Party is now approaching the thing. There's a lady called Stella Creasy, and she's making some really helpful noises now about trying to rebuild some bridges with Europe.
We've got twice the population density of France. France would have to take 80 million people in to be at the same level, so that's utterly ridiculous, isn't it, us taking more refugees?
Look what's happened in Denmark, look what's happened in Norway, Sweden, various other countries who've had too many people coming in.
Well, I completely agree with you. I 100% agree with you, but you're not going to get an arrangement on this without having an agreement also with the EU.
Wouldn't Reform do it, though? Reform say they'd do it.
Stanley, let me ask you this. If this was a land border and we had left, as we have, most of the European dictatorship, if this was a land border, we would not be allowing these people through the gates. They're coming here illegally, and we should just dump them back on the beaches of Calais and
where they're not in danger. They're not refugees, really. Their lives are safe in France.
I think you'll discover that the legal migration is far more significant than illegal migration into this country, and we can only deal with that by looking at the whole.
We have to do the whole thing.
Wider issue.
Yeah. But we have to.
We do. Well,
people people who have no papers, have no passports, have no information about themselves, and just land here are difficult to deal with.
But 2 million legal immigrants in 2 or 3 years.
That is why one of the problems of the situation we're now in. We are not any longer part of the Dublin Agreement. We do not have any longer an automatic right to send back people so that they're, as it were, sent back to the point they first entered the EU.
So
We've lost that ability.
If we join that again, would that be a good idea?
It would. It would indeed. It would absolutely.
Why don't we do it and get rid of everyone?
You want to see us back in the EU, really, in all but name, don't you?
I want to see us with a sensible framework of relationships with the EU, and I very much hope that we go down that route. And so to go back to your original hypothesis of the, as it were, Boris and Farage, it would tremendously depend, from my point of view, on where that group was headed.
Okay.
Does Boris want to come back into power, or has he had enough?
I'm not going to comment. I'm absolutely not going to comment on that. I'm not going to comment on it. I mean,
they would have won with Boris, though, wouldn't they?
Let me put it a different way. Do you think the Tories would have won if Boris had been in charge? Kept more seats, anyway.
What I do think is that it is absolutely absurd to see the way the Labour Party appears to have amassed a very large number of seats. Is it a majority of 170 or something like that? I can't remember what it is. Yes. What it is now, on the basis of a turnout which is actually even less, I think, than the turnout which Jeremy Corbyn.
Do we need to change the system then? It's time to change.
Hang on. What are your thoughts on the fact that Reform got over 500,000, nearly 1 million more votes than the Liberal Democrats? They get 5 members of Parliament, and the Lib Dems get 71.
71.
Yeah. Well, my thoughts are that it is high time to revisit this whole system. Whether you go down the additional vote system, as far as I remember, that was actually proposed way back by David Cameron, and I think it was turned down by the House of Lords. I'm pretty sure.
Labour aren't going to go for that, are they? Turkey's voting for Christmas. They want 16-year-olds to get the vote to keep them in, which is disgraceful.
Well, I think we're going to have to see a major reform of the voting patterns in this country. It was not, as it were, the right result.
They're not going to want to change that. It worked for them, didn't it?
Well, this Labour landslide does not reflect the actual arithmetic in the country.
No, that's the problem.
Stanley, thank you very much indeed. It's going to be an interesting few years, isn't it?
And thanks for your patience as I try to sort out the technology. I mean,
listen,
I really appreciate that.
You and I are quite elderly, I think, Stanley.
You're a bit older, aren't you, than Stanley?
I'm older than you, Stanley.
He's a lot older than you, Stanley.
How old are you, Stanley?
I'm older. I'm in my 9th decade, well into my 9th decade.
Same as James.
You're 90. You're not.
No, I said I'm in my 9th decade.
So he's 80
okay. So you're 80.
All his hair, look, all his hair's there.
Well, I'm in my 8th decade then. Yeah.
Hey, well, listen, we better go and find out what happened in the football.
Nothing yet.
1-1.
Thank you very much, Stanley. Nice to talk to you. Stanley, Johnson, Boris's dad.